This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Friday, 17th January 2025 to be deferred. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
Questions that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Questions? Report from select committees. First reading of bills. Statements by ministers. Congratulatory and or victory speeches. Personal explanations. Motions for leave of absence. Oral replies to questions. Notice of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance. Orders of the day.
Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government Business is the order of the day.
Order number 11, in the name of the Honourable Attorney General, to move the passing of a resolution to adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee standing on the social sector and the environment on the Health Services Amendment Bill 2024 and the proposed Health Services Nuisances Regulations 2024.
Honourable Member St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, this debate on the resolution to adopt the report of the Select Committee standing on the social sector and the environment, on the Health Services Amendment Bill and the proposed Health Services Nuisances Regulations is an example of a parliamentary process that I believe is much improved over previous ways of doing the business of Parliament. And at the outset, I'd like, therefore, to thank the chairman, the chairperson of the committee, the member for St. George North, and all of the other committee members who served, including one of the opposition senators, who I am told made a very robust and intellectually sound contribution in the deliberations of this committee. I hope his leader thanks him, but I certainly want to thank him for being willing and so generously participating in the deliberations of the committee. And I want to thank him too for his unanimous support of the work of the committee by appending his signature to the end of the report as a signal of his approval. Mr. Speaker, this committee met on several occasions, but I'd like to point out that they first invited 38 entities to participate in its hearings. The hearings were public, they were broadcast on social media, streamed live, and it is a clear example, Mr. Speaker, of how this administration deals with matters of public concern. I hope that all members of the public appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this health services regulations and whether they in fact weighed in or not. Mr. Speaker, the fact that the Parliament of Barbados made itself available through this select standing committee to receive contributions, to receive constructive proposals, is government in action and government that is truly participatory. Mr. Speaker, this is not a matter that I expect would engage the chamber for too long this morning, but it is still important for me to outline the report. The chairman is here. I hope that she doesn't mind if I say a few things about the essence of the report. But other members of the committee are here, and I will leave them to do as they wish in that regard. I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, that the report itself contains a number of excellent proposals made by Barbadians who are keenly in support of the protection of our environment. There are some people, Mr. Speaker, who seem to believe that the environment doesn't matter. We still have Barbadians who litter in a way that is really disgraceful. One of a site that I saw in Bathsheba only on Sunday was litter all over the place. And while this regulation and this amendment is not intended to deal with that, I simply want to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that while a government does its part in ensuring that our country is clean, there's an obligation on every single citizen of Barbados to keep public spaces clean by not littering, but also to keep their environs clean. And that perhaps is a good jumping point, Mr. Speaker, for the presentation of this report. Because this report is an examination of the scheme that the government wants to put in place to ensure that Barbadians keep premises that are under their responsibility in a clean manner. Now, some bright person will ask, well, what does clean mean? Well, Mr. Speaker, somebody famously said it is difficult to define terrorism, but when you see it, you know it. We may not be able to define clean in a way that would fit in, that would be accommodated easily in one of our legal dictionaries. But this legislation, this regulation attempts to establish a scheme which sets, insofar as it is possible, certain standards approved by the health services people, approved by the public health officers, because they were worked on with their support, so as to give Barbadians something to measure their surroundings by. Yes, to some extent, there are some things that we will consider to be arbitrary. The regulations propose a specific, let me cite it for you, Mr. Speaker. The regulations propose certain specific things, but the point is, so for example, it says that it is a general nuisance if grass, bush, or weeds exceed 2 feet in height. One person who participated in the committee hearings, not a member of the committee, said that it should be 5 feet. No, 5 feet is real tall. There are people in this chamber who there are people in this chamber who are a little bit diminutive and would find it hard to wade through anything that is 5 feet tall. Happily, the grass and bush in Christchurch South is kept relatively low, and that would not present a problem. That would not present a problem for certain people. But the point is, sir, it is difficult to set numerical standards for some things because there will always be some debate. Somebody will feel that 2 feet is too tall. There were positions advanced that we should stick to 6 or 8 inches. That would serve the purpose of reducing all of Barbados to a huge lawn and might in itself create environmental difficulties, but equally, setting it at 5 feet is probably too far east. So yes, we appreciate the contributions of those environmentalists. We appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that everyone does not have and will not have the necessary means to be able to address all of the issues in these regulations. But Mr. Speaker, what is certain is that we cannot adopt a stance of doing nothing simply because we cannot agree on the minutiae. There will always be a debate on some elements, but the point is, the important thing is that we have set standards. These standards have had the input of the agencies of government that are responsible for dealing with them. And once these regulations are made, consequent upon the passing of the amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, we hope that Barbadians will begin to comply. Now, we've already debated this bill in this chamber, and therefore there is little point in engaging in a repetition of the points that were made on that previous occasion. And in fact, I suspect that might be to put us in breach of the standing orders. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, that the amendments which were agreed by the committee to be made to the bill, which really is the key thing, is to delete the definition of minister. In the legislation, in the health services legislation, Mr. Speaker, minister was defined as being the minister responsible for health. Long ago, Mr. Speaker, we stopped the legislative practice of defining minister as being a minister responsible for a particular subject matter. The reason is obvious, Mr. Speaker. There are only 2 statutory ministers in our Constitution, a Minister of Finance and an Attorney General. But over the years since we've had cabinet government as an independent country, portfolios change and departments are moved from ministry to ministry. In my own short political career, I remember the days when when sanitation was under the Ministry of Health. Water was under the Ministry of Health. We didn't always have a ministry responsible for the environment, so anything that was responsible that had environmental issues connected to it was with the Ministry of Health. But our country has become more sophisticated. Our model of governance has changed somewhat. We recognize the importance of having perhaps a microscopic approach on other parts of governance and other portfolios, and therefore new ministries have been created. In the short time since we came to government, we had the police service being under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and then it moved to the Attorney General. There was a time when the Attorney General was also the minister responsible for Home Affairs. And AG's past, certainly when I was AG, I had responsibility for the post office, had responsibility for fire, had responsibility for the prison, the police, a whole set of things. So the point is, Mr. Speaker, that for good and sensible reason, we have stopped defining minister as having a particular portfolio responsibility and simply relying on the provision which says minister means the person under whom a particular portfolio is assigned. Because under the Health Services Act, minister meant Minister of Health. But the Environmental Protection Department, which will have the day-to-day responsibility of addressing some, if not all, of these matters, because everything wouldn't be under EPD. They had some discomfort, and people did advance the situation that you had the Minister of Health, while not having portfolio responsibility for environmental protection, having the legal capacity or the legal authority to overreach into a department for whom he does not have responsibility. Now, I'm happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that in the last 6 years, we've had no such issue. The last 7 years, we've had no such issue. Our departments have been able to work seamlessly. We didn't have ministers butting their heads against each other. But in order to ensure that there is no technical difficulty, it made sense, Mr. Speaker, to change the definition of minister, to delete the definition of minister, where it says minister means responsibility for the ministry for health. That is the change made to the bill. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have adopted, in this instance, what I consider to be a novel but important practice. Because strictly speaking, the Select Committee should have looked at that which was before it. In other words, the amendments to the Health Services Bill was the subject matter of what was before the Select Committee, because that is the bill, that is what went to Select Committee, that is what was laid in Parliament. But, Mr. Speaker, we must never become so hidebound and rigid in our approaches that we avoid or opt not to do the sensible thing. The only reason we were amending the Health Services Act was to be able to facilitate the making of new regulations. We had to do the amendment to the Act first, which will then allow the minister, it will give him the legal authority to make the regulations. Those regulations, therefore, have not yet been made. But it was a counsel of prudence for us not to go to a Select Committee with just a bald amendment, but instead to present to the public of Barbados the proposal that we intend to put in place as regulations. Now, Mr. Speaker, we could have said, no, we ain't discussing that. We're only discussing the amendments to the bill. But, Mr. Speaker, more important than the amendment to the bill would be the actual regulation which will come into force and create new obligations on the public of Barbados. So while strictly speaking, a purist might argue that never ought to have formed the subject of the deliberations, a practical person would argue, but it should form the subject matter of the deliberations. Because we have to get to what is it that is going to be affecting how Barbadians live and work and play and move. Not the amendment to the bill, but the health services regulation that we are bringing now to replace the one that we had since the 1960s. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that on the last occasion I spoke, I referred to the fact that we were still in the area of using terms that have long fallen out of use. So things like night soil. I mean, I have a feeling that if I ask any member of this chamber, what is night soil, they would be wondering, night soil? They're saying that is grow at night, or that is planted at night. I see the member for the city looking a little puzzled. But the point I'm making is that in the 1960s, when the regulations were first put in place, you had a different Barbados. You had a very different Barbados. You had different concepts. You had different health issues. You had different kinds of nuisances. Yes, you had to deal with the poor, the potty, the chamber pot, whatever you want to call it. I grew up in that generation. And we had them. We had them. But Barbados has changed significantly, and it was important for us to change the regulations, to modernize them, and in as much as we were going to present a substantially different scheme, it was important to put it before the people. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the methodology that we use for enforcement of public conduct, and perhaps continue to use too much, is by dragging people before the court, resulting in backlog, public servants having to, there's a case I'm aware of which has been adjourned repeatedly, and the individuals from the health, who are dealing with the health services regulations have gone to court like 12 or 15 times. Every time they go to court, the offender and his attorney, adjournment. You're wasting public officers' time by going up to court repeatedly. And of course, I understand why the accused person would want to resist getting a conviction, because the conviction will criminalize him or her. So that's why we've said, let's do away with that, and let's have a system of an administrative fine. You're not calling somebody a criminal because they got empty paint skillets at the house gathering mosquitoes. That is not criminal conduct. An environmentalist might want to hang you for it, but that is not a person. That is often more neglect than an individual who decides that they can just keep these things here to harbor mosquitoes, as we say. So what we needed to present to the public through this particular report, through this particular committee process, was the new method of dealing with it, and that is by putting administrative penalties in place. And, Mr. Speaker, some individuals came to the committee and they said, I don't like this, I don't like that. The time is too long. The fines are too high. But I am very proud of the opposition senator, who I understand made the point. I understand, and the member for St. George North complimented him in a very fond way. It worries me. Perhaps that's the explanation. Complimented him for being perspicacious enough to recognize that the hardship provision in the regulations were such that he was able to represent that that those provisions can take care of instances where the fines are perceived to be a problem, or the individual is not able to address the particular issue. So that we now have a number of preemptive amendments to the regulations. We really can't call them amendments because, again, the regulations are not in place, but there are recommendations for ways in which the regulations can be improved before they're made. Mr. Speaker, I am so proud of this Parliament for having introduced these standing select committees. I'm proud to be a part of an administration that recognizes that, especially in circumstances where you have a supermajority in Parliament, it is even more important to go to the public through the committee process and allow the public to have a say. We've never tried to push anything down the throats of this Parliament, nor have we tried to push anything down the throats of the electorate. The only amendments to be made in this chamber today will be the amendments to be made to the bill. That's the only amendment before us. But I'm happy to say that the amendments that are proposed for the regulations, I believe the minister will certainly take note of them and be more than willing to see to it that these proposals these proposed amendments to the regulations are put in place. I salute the members of the committee for working on this bill and regulations in the way in which they did. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that it allows us now to move to a stage where we can pass the amendment, and the minister will in very short order be able to lay these regulations in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the health services regulations are many, and we're not allowed to engage in anticipatory debates, but suffice it to say that in the same way that we've looked at this regulation, which dates back to the 1960s, manpower permitting, I believe that the Ministry of Health will find itself in a place where it will want to review many of these regulations that are now so old and in some respects outdated. So with those words, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
Honourable for Christchurch South.
I'm much obliged to you, Your Honor. I'm also obliged to the learned Attorney General for the manner in which he seeks to conduct this debate, short as it will be. And on behalf of the senator to whom he referred, that is Senator Worrell, I convey to him, to the learned Attorney General, gratitude for the description of Senator Worrell. He described him as robust and intellectually sound. And I don't think the learned Attorney General did that to in any